the beginning of that is the same. We have the acts of recruitment, obtaining of a person, moving, transporting, or harboring a person through force or fraud coercion for the purpose of domestic servitude, meaning that traffickers this time are interested in the labor and the work of the individual. What is very significant, we see more and more in the United States, including our local community, is the domestic work. It's also famous as domestic enslavements, that individuals, particularly even children, have been recruited, even forced by their parents to stay at home and take care of the other siblings, so that the parents can go home and then, so that the parents can go to work and provide for the family. So this is the classic version of a labor trafficking victim. At the time when this was developed, we didn't have the terminology, we didn't have any human trafficking law, so we didn't have the advocates lobby for Cinderella. But now, according to the newest law, Cinderella is an example and perfect story of a labor trafficking victim. What is very sad about it is that, well, we all, whoever watched the story, we sympathize, empathize with her, but I can tell you that as of today, sometimes as close as some areas in Lincoln County, we still see kids as young as 10 and 12, they are in this situation. And what is sad about it, when parents are reached out, families are reached out to just explain the situation to them, the answer is that, well, I've done that too. My parents did that too. So we have been just doing it for years. What? We just don't understand what is wrong about it. So all I want to tell you that about labor trafficking, it requires first changing a culture and mindset of people and families that they have doing some practices for years. And to so many of them, it's just something that they have been doing it generation after generation. And it's so difficult for them to just explain it to them why it is wrong. So this is an example of one of the cases, one of the labor trafficking cases. Oftentimes, when we have labor trafficking cases involving that, traffickers have them think that there is a huge debt that they still need to get back to the traffickers, as you see here. So traffickers start billing everything. This particular case was about an individual that was approached by a sponsor. So also trafficker, when it comes to labor trafficking, has different names. So it's also a sponsor. My sponsor is sometimes used as a terminology to actually refer to the trafficker. So reach out by Facebook by the promise that there are some jobs available in the United States, and they were recruiting that minor to bring her to the United States. So what happened, at the same time, they are using a smuggler. Now here, smuggling is a different crime than human trafficking. Smuggling involves passing the individual from international borders, and also 100% consent involves in smuggling, and victims or the people hire the smugglers, pay them money to do that. However, in labor trafficking, remember, we are lacking the consent. So in this story, $10,000 for the smuggling fees from Mexico, even $45 for the taco. I mean, the even prices they charge and doesn't make sense. Even after this high inflation, I still don't think that we can find taco for $45. And this case is for about 60 years ago. So then traffickers just dabbled everything and used the lack of knowledge and information and even the English that perhaps some victims could have. And then at the end of the day, as you see, the debt is just keep building up, building up. Doesn't matter how many hours, how long the victim works for labor traffickers, still they owe them a lot. And they feel that they are obligated to continue this work for the human traffickers. So what is do you recall that we had that magic age of 18 in sex trafficking, that we said because of the special laws, minors, individuals under the age of 18, they are protected by the law. We don't have to prove force, fraud, coercion. Any minor providing commercial sex act considers automatically a victim of sex trafficking. So that does not happen. That magic number of 18 doesn't happen for working children in the United States. We have Fair Labor Standard Act of 1938 that allows children legally to work. From some states it's 12, some states it's 14. In the state of Missouri, the minimum age that minors can work legally is 14 years old. It means that when it comes to investigating labor trafficking situation, we have to assume in the state of Missouri, children between 14 and 18 considers to be adults. And like we are establishing the situation for adult cases, we have to establish that there was force or fraud or coercion involved in that cases that the minor engaged in those labor acts. And that is, I can tell you from experience that this is almost impossible to establish such a thing. That's why one of the frustration and one of the obstacles in identifying more labor trafficking cases. We see more and more of popular forms of labor trafficking also happening in the United States that even the system doesn't have a clue that they are labor trafficking situations and cases. One of the important labor trafficking situations that you may see a lot in your line of duty is a form of labor trafficking which is called forced drug dealing. Have you heard of that? But I'm sure that you have seen many of those scenarios and stories. Sometimes you may respond to a call that there is an overdose in a household and you show up. So usually forced drug dealing is a form of labor trafficking happens within those families and households that the care providers or the parents, they are drug addicted. And they rely on the use of the drug. Sometimes when they don't have the drug, they're gonna even be violent, just gonna hurt the kids, and they're just gonna do anything and everything to provide a piece of drug for themselves. So what happens, these parents, drug dealers, who are aware of the family situation, in this kind of household, usually we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 children, that the older one is usually 12, 13, 14. What happens, these drug dealers target these families, and they know the situation. So they are coming with an offer to that older children in the family who could be 12, 13, or 14. And the offer is that, here is what I'm gonna do. You see that mommy and daddy, when they are out of it, they are just so violent, they are beating you and your siblings. The answer is yes. So the drug dealer comes up with a solution. Here is this amount of drug I'm gonna give you daily so that you can provide to your parents so that they are out of it and they are not bothering you and your siblings anymore. Also, I'm gonna give you $20, $30, whatever, every day, so that you can buy food for yourself and your siblings so that you are not hungry. In exchange, I'm going to give you 5, 6, 7 addresses with just a package that you need to just take them for me. That's it. That's all I'm gonna ask you. This is called forced drug dealing, and it's a form of labor trafficking that is unfortunately unidentified as a form of labor trafficking in our local communities. Every day we see many of these younger children who are forced to deal the drug, and simply they just want to leave. Simply they are just hungry. Simply it's a hot summer and they just need the electricity so that just cool down a little bit. Or it's a winter and they want to just keep going the gas. They are victims, so they eventually catch up or the system catch them. And what happens, they end up in the juvenile system as a child who was doing drug, could be in a school setting, it could be in community setting, but the reality is that we need to revise the criminal justice system. These type of kids are victims of labor trafficking. One of our goals is that to raise this awareness for everyone. So those houses you see, you experience, you observe that overdose going on, drug issues going on, you see those small kids, you see that the small young children involved in these kind of activities or they experience overdose, make sure that you check these elements, that there could be some things going on that the regular public is not aware of that. Unfortunately, in our community, I'm a member of the community accused for that. We have judgmental eyes. We see something, we see a 12-year-old minor is just taking drug from this block to the other block, this neighborhood to the other neighborhood, and we know which family they are from, and we call them those druggy kids, druggy family. We even also are naming them, the whole household and family. But we don't realize that that 12, 13-year-old has no choice but dealing that drug in order to just survive for a couple of days. And these are the things we want to just raise awareness to make sure you're aware of that.
My parents joined a religious organization in the early 90s. They've given their time, money, and ultimately their children to this organization. In summer of 2002, my mother received a phone call from one of the executive representatives of the group. The lady was calling to inform my parents that it was the will of God that my brother and I began our pilgrimage into manhood. And part of that meant moving to the headquarters of the organization, located in Kansas City, Kansas. So the following evening, our bags were packed, and we were off to begin this new life. When we got there, we were taken to meet the strangers who would transport us. After giving our parents our hugs and saying our goodbyes, we discovered that our arranged transportation was on the back of a 18-wheeler semi-truck. We rode nearly 600 miles on the back of a truck as if we were packages being sent out for delivery. When we arrived to Kansas, we were taken to the place we would stay, a small apartment. There were dozens of boys and men packed like sardines. We were immediately put to work, dictated on how to dress, how to speak, how to walk, what to eat. And to disobey meant severe punishment, slashes with a rod or paddle, days, sometimes weeks of fasting, or worse, beaten till bones were broken, face swollen, anything that would remind the other kids what happens when you disobey. I started out as a dishwasher in back of the restaurant owned by the traffickers. I would work countless hours a day, restlessly reporting in at 8 a.m. and not leaving sometimes till 3 a.m. the next morning. One time, I showed up late for work, a habit I soon regret making, because almost immediately upon walking through the doorway of the small diner, I found myself on the floor bleeding after being hit in the mouth with a yellow page phone book. Attempting to stand to my feet, the man began to beat me on the back until I passed out. Acts of violence were not of rare occasion at all. a good friend of mine named Najee found himself being questioned by 4 men about something he should not have done. Almost immediately, without notice, one of the men threw a punch that brought Najee to the floor. The other 3 men eagerly followed up with blows of their own. They concluded their beatdown section by kicking him down a flight of about 13 stairs. To add insult to injury, one of the guys literally poured salt on Najee's wounds. I was just 12 years old, shocked, saddened, and terrified of the possibility of facing the same consequences as my older friend. Till this day, I'm still unsure of what Najee did wrong. But one thing was made clear to me: my well-being was no longer in my parents' hands. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Elijah, why didn't you just pick up the phone and call your parents and tell them what was going on? If the traffickers allowed me to use the phone, the call was monitored by the executives to be sure that not too much detail was given as pertains to what was going on. And so the next 9 years that followed, without my parents' permission, I was taken to New Jersey, Georgia, Maryland, and places all around the country that the trafficking organization owned property. It began to seem like every year I was being taken to one place to the next. And everywhere I went, the living arrangements were the same as what I experienced in Kansas. Finally, the last place I worked before escaping the group was Harlem, New York. While working in the trafficker's New York restaurant, I had received word that a friend of mine had died. Message of her death began to spread like wildfire. Feeling bombarded by all the questions surrounding the young teen's death, the founder of the organization made an announcement of it. In a nutshell, he said that the young girl wanted to die, and she killed herself by becoming ill. It seemed that most people accepted that explanation, but not me. I knew better. How do you go from being well to 2 months later being ashes in an urn? Not soon after, I learned the truth. My friend pleaded that she did not feel well. She begged to be taken to the hospital. They forced her to work through her illness until eventually her immune system shut down. We were not allowed to seek professional medical help. That meant no annual physicals, no dentist, and no treatment for illness. In her case, she was allowed to go to the ER, but by the time they began treatment, it was too late. Parents all around the country joined this forced labor, human trafficking ring, disguised as a religious organization, willingly sending their children off, placing them in an unfortunate situation. My childhood was ripped from me When I finally got out, it was a culture shock to say the least. People would ask me about my upbringing and my life, and I would tell them things that sound good to avoid talking about what I went through. But it wasn't until I embraced my truth that I actually started to heal. And you know what? I learned I am not that unique. We all have things that we've been through that has caused us to dare ourselves to be ourselves. Fortunately, I have overcome most obstacles that have stood in my way. Good therapy, developing friendships, education, and work related to survivors like myself makes me thrive. By far, my greatest assets are my family and friends. When I fall to moments of sadness, nightmares, anxiety, and confusion, it is them who lift me up. And although moments and years of my life stolen could have wrecked me, I have gotten up stronger than ever.
We have a case pending in St. Louis area. It was a man like this group started a spiritual academy. He came and he introduced himself as a man of faith, and then reached out to parents and said, well, I have an academy that I can provide experiential learning for your children. So just hand them to me. So they're going to serve Lord, and also when they're graduated, they have lots of experience. They're just going to be good, graduated and grown up as good people and serving people. So what he did, he actually rented one of the old churches in St. Louis area. So he started that pizza business. He was engaging all of these minors as young as 12 to provide the work labor for this pizza shop that he was offering. After a couple of years, also the labor aspect of that turned to be also sexual exploitation. What was very interesting, he also was inviting once in a while law enforcement officer to the business and providing them free pizza. And then behind the scene, he was just telling those kids that, remember, if you're going to say anything, you see officer this and this, it's my friend. They are coming to the business, so you know that you cannot say anything. So he was keeping them in that situation of just shutting their mouth and even not sharing anything or telling anything. What is very interesting about this case, now he started, it's in a process that he just wanted to represent himself, and unfortunately the judge allowed that to happen. And where we are in that case now, he started one by one calling the children who was exploited once, and then he's cross-examining them himself, which is a very cruel practice that a trafficker may do in order to further traumatize their victims in the case. So this case is about 7 years and it's still pending. They haven't been able to just close the case. But the reason I'm sharing this, not only it's another example of labor trafficking, I shared with you something earlier today that in labor trafficking, we also experience changing a mindset and a culture within the communities. And unfortunately, we see these scenarios that people in the name of God, traffickers in the name of God, use that to exploit and brainwash families, to manipulate families, particularly to get their children away. Remember, for human, it's not, the bottom line of the story is that it really is not anything about the faith. Faith has been used in generations throughout the history as a reason to manipulate people easier to do things for the purpose. So unfortunately, we have seen in the nation, in our local area, that could be an element or a way that labor traffickers trying to manipulate families. I want to talk to you a little bit about human trafficking operation, including the recruitment. We reviewed about human trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, what they are, the risk factors. We reviewed an important article about how you can play a role in identifying labor trafficking situations. And now let's just talk about some of the locations. People think human trafficking recruitment happens in unusual setting. But the reality from all the cases we have worked on, we have seen human trafficking happens, the recruitment happens in our schools, bus and train station, family courts, believe it or not, even police stations. We have had cases that traffickers were targeting individuals. Even in the malls, truck stops have been one other locations, particularly for sex trafficking victims, have been targeted for that. We have had shelters that sadly and unfortunately traffickers send their agent to target vulnerable people, particularly when it comes to LGBTQ plus minorities and children. We have seen that a lot for some reasons. Number one, in the greater St. Louis area, we do not have, unfortunately, LGBTQ plus culturally appropriate shelter. And also, we have seen that, yet it's a story of many of their families do not approve and accept their situations. And unfortunately and sadly, we have had cases that families just kick them out of the house. So we have a story scenarios that we have a 10, 12, 13, 14-year-old minor is homeless. And the only reason is that because they identify themselves as a member of LGBTQ plus community. So the only way is for them to go to one of the shelters. It is not uncommon for human traffickers particularly target these minors. They send one or some of their agents as the clients of these shelters so that they can look for those particular vulnerabilities. The scenario usually goes this way. After a while that they could just be friends with that person. They provide the information for the trafficker, and somehow that the person who's a little bit upper than the agent in the shelter reach out to this minor and says, because here is what happened. The person who's the agent of the trafficker in the shelter, they just get enough information from that individual so that they can provide to the next person. And the next person now has more intelligence and information to help this minor, particularly minors, to trust them. And then the story goes this way. After providing those stories, tell them that, hey, I know that you are in this situation. Let me help you, and I'm going to help you. So I have a house. All of my kids are out in college now or married, living in other states. So I have 3 bedrooms empty in my house. So just stay with me in one of the bedrooms. You're going to get your bathroom, everything, so feel comfortable. Just for a while, stay with me so that you can figure out what you're going to do. What do you expect from a 12, 13, 14-year-old just kicked out of the house with literally nothing? They trust, because that's the only way they have to go. But that's the moment exploitation just begins. We also have had cases that traffickers recruit some minors who are in lower economic, that they fall for even some small amount of cash to become their agent in the schools to recruit vulnerable people's students the same way for them. A recent case we had in South St. Louis County, a 6th grader was in charge of the traffickers' agents in the school to recruit 8th graders in exchange of only $20 for traffickers. So unfortunately, every day we see that traffickers more and more started adopting their own recruitment system to be able to target vulnerable people as close as possible. And these are 2 examples of the real cases and scenarios we had in our area. Of course, that the online technology also has been another way that we see more and more traffickers engage to recruit vulnerable people. I shared a little bit with you that unfortunately, COVID pandemic also helped a lot to human traffickers to adjust more and more within their operations. We have had cases, and the reason I'm using we have had because we thought that it's going to be only the duration of the COVID pandemic. Unfortunately, now that we are almost out of the pandemic, we see that more and more traffickers still engage in the same kind of technology and way, not only in recruitment, but also in engagement and exploitation of the victims. I shared with you that we have had cases that traffickers were selling minors through live streaming for only $20 as low as 17 minutes live sex services. And these cases happens while parents were doing their own remote job in the kitchen or in the basement, and traffickers were recruiting and exploiting their children in their bedroom, second floor. And then what happened, COVID helped traffickers to see that how actually they could be located in another state, even in another country, and target vulnerable children in our community without even being worried about being targeted or arrested. We have had cases. Last year, we had a case in Lincoln County that it was a minor 13-year-old groomed and targeted by an individual through one of the social media apps. He was not even in this country. And you can see that how it is going to create challenges for these type of cases. What was very sad about that story in Lincoln County, so the minor was 13-year-old when that approach happened, recruiting happened, and then her parents realized that something is off about that. They tried to give the phone away, not to allow her to have access to online technology, and then one day they learned that she managed somehow to use the school system and connect with him again through emailing that perpetrator and trafficker. And then when her mother figured out what was going on, and she was trying to go through some more ways to get the device away so that she was not able to email him, she got violence and she beat her mom in a very bad way that the mom had to be hospitalized for those injuries that her own daughter created on her. So these are the stories and situations we see about human trafficking. Do not forget the power of coercion and psychological manipulation. That is everything in our contemporary time to have a person get engaged in trafficking operation from recruitment to providing services. It just messed up with the whole mental system of the individual in a way that they just do everything for their traffickers. So human traffickers may target individuals, as we said, based on the need they have, like that scenario of that LGBTQ plus minor, the need of a shelter, a safe shelter, housing, food. They befriend their victims. They offer them gifts. Remember the story of Samantha. She was receiving so many gifts. Trafficker Tipton was taking her to malls, restaurants, and everything in order to just establish those boundaries and friendship. And remember, they target their victims through the isolation. Whoever is isolated within their community is a perfect example and target for human traffickers. And then in the next couple of slides, we're going to focus on individuals with disabilities, and you're going to see what is the importance of the isolation in the exploitation and human trafficking. And then we see more abuses that happens. Traffickers are looking for control and power. That's the theme we see that many of traffickers engage. So a couple of important things about victims and survivors. Number one is that they don't identify themselves as victims. Remember Samantha. I shared with you that a year and a half after the conviction, we learned that Samantha started writing love letters to her trafficker in the jail, who's miles away from her. She doesn't see her as a victim. She just doesn't see the situation the way we see that, and that is a problem. You may respond to a situation that to you the situation is obvious about exploitation scenario you may see, but the survivor or the victim may repeat that, no, I'm okay, I wanted to do that. It wasn't anything like that you think. And that is one of the keys. They don't identify themselves as a victim. They don't trust law enforcement. Remember that Dijo pizza. Traffickers do a good job in time. Put in mind of their victims that you can't trust authorities. You can't trust law enforcement. You can't trust the system to do anything for you. And because they don't want victims just disclose any information to the authorities. Also, they are afraid that trafficker is going to get back to them. One of the important cases we had back in 2014 in Western District of Missouri, actually it was in Kansas area. It was a case of a mother, single mother, who had also disabilities, mental disabilities, with a 5-year-old daughter. So traffickers got her and her daughter, hold her daughter, and then they were beating her so badly. And those beating was for the purpose of sending her and then dropping her off close to one of the hospitals. The whole purpose of these scenarios and situations was to get her into the ER and the hospital so that they can get prescription medication through her. And then they were using those prescription medication for themselves. The reason that case came out, and then whenever she was the mother, who was also under the age of 30, she was trying to complain or say anything, they were threatening her that, hey, look, you know about your situation, and you know we have your daughter. What do you think is going to happen to you if you're going to say anything to any of these nurses? They're going to institutionalize you, and then they're going to get away your daughter, and they're going to put her in the system. Do you want that happen to you and your daughter? And then she was thinking that, that's true, that's going to happen to me. So then traffickers, once in a while, they are not taking her, dropping her off close to the same hospital. They were just moving county by county, different locations, so that they were not creating any pattern. What happened finally at one of these locations, the injuries she had was very severe, and one of the nurses, in addition to providing care, she just tried to just look for a pattern of this kind of injuries in her. And she was able to locate her in the system, and she realized that she also has been hospitalized before for this kind of situation and injuries in the past couple of months. At that time, the nurse didn't have any suspicions about human trafficking. She thought that's a domestic violence situation. So she reported that accordingly. And what happened when investigators came in, they realized that it's actually a human trafficking situation. And they were able to rescue her and her daughter. Also, there is another situation, a story within this story, which is the fact that human trafficking shares so many signs with domestic violence, sexual assault, and also child abuse. And that is okay. Whatever signs you see that is off, doesn't sound right to you, listen to your gut. Report it accordingly. And what happened when those investigators come in, they are trained. They know what kind of signs to look for to connect them to that particular case and situation. I know that in the Eastern District of Missouri, our task force, because of the sex trafficking cases we have, all of them involves a sexual assault scenario. The base for proving and establishing, build on the sex trafficking cases in our area is that we just base it on sexual assault. And then we try to build on other facts and evidence that it can take it to the next level of sex trafficking situations. Also, victims and survivors blame themselves for the situation. In the case I just shared with you from the Western District of Missouri, the mom was blaming herself because of her condition. That because she was in that mental condition, she put herself and her daughter in that situation to just keep being beaten and also exploited. And this is a pattern among all victims and survivors. Doesn't matter what is their vulnerability that they got into the situation, they all feel and think this is their fault. They did something wrong that they are in this position now. So that is very important for you to be aware of that. And also, traffickers do a great job keep and hold survivors and victims in isolation. And that means that victims and survivors, they don't know they are victims. They don't know they have rights. They don't know there are resources available for them. And some of the things you can do is that as simple as just having some of these brochures that is available, and I'm happy to share some of the brochures with you. Just have some of the resources. If this is something you would like, there are resources in St. Charles County from housing to counseling and everything that just lists the numbers of institutions. Your approach could be as simply as, hey, just want to leave this brochure with you. It's a list of the institutions that they provide services, from free food to counseling to dental to so many things. And they start with the things that doesn't hurt them, like food, like clothes, like so many other things that they don't feel that you're targeting them for a special need that you think they may have. And then just leave it with them and let them just review that and learn about it, because majority of these cases we see it's through coercion. And sometimes when people realize that what they are within it, it's not normal, so they come out and seek for more help. And they are look out to see what is available so that they can use. Yes?
I had an interesting thought. Thinking about like helping them with like their basic needs.
Yes.
Like when you're talking about coercion, like those needs sometimes are met for them, and then maybe they recognize that, and so it can become even more difficult to give them the help. Like maybe they recognize it thinking, like if someone reaches out to help, they may feel like, oh no, this person's gonna manipulate me again. Like, because they might look at that as a sign.
So the approach is very important. So that's why we suggest that just do not force your opinion or what you think it's right for them. You're gonna do this. It's just very simple. You know, by the way, there are some resources available. Just take your time, in your time, just review them and see what is appropriate for you. So remember that, as you mentioned, traffickers target them, coerce them, and control them. So the approaches is someone who's a first responder gonna help should be opposite of that. It's that we are not dictating you. We are not controlling you. We give you the authority to just review this and let us know that what are your needs, and we are there to help you. Does that make sense? Okay. So trauma-informed is very important in the response to human trafficking situation. Going back to your question is that don't blame them. Don't put any pressure on them. Do not disrespect them. Don't try to control them. All of the things that traffickers have been done, providing them misinformation, misguiding them, putting them back on them, well, you did that. Because of this, you deserve that. You put yourself in those situations in a way that they feel that they are respected. And the first step starts with calling them survivors, not victims, because victims has a negative meanings that take them back to all of those trauma that victimize them. Whereas survivor is a terminology that gives them hope, encouragement, that they are out of that is behind them, and we are all here to provide them services and support. Now, in the next couple of slides, I want to share important information about individuals with disabilities and why and how they get into the human trafficking situation. And I'm going to share with you why I think this is important for you to particularly know this information about this particular population. We have seen in the past couple of years, working with service providers, housing providers in our area, we have seen that, and they shared with us that over 83% of the survivors they serve, they've been diagnosed with some form of disabilities, including emotional disabilities. And what is very important that post the COVID pandemic, as the mental health is a concern for everyone, people started being diagnosed with more symptoms of emotional disabilities. Emotional disability is exactly what put people in the position to be coerced easier, to fall for false promises that they have been given. But the fact is that emotional disabilities is not a physical disability that we're just gonna learn. It's a behavior, it's a change in the behavior that people close to people may identify those kind of behavior within the individuals. It's not something that I just see you today, I realize that you have some issues, or the same, vice versa. Because we are not in interaction with each other. But that emotional disability is something that put the victim in a more vulnerable situation to fall for, as I mentioned, false promises. All of those coercive relationships that traffickers want to establish for them. So, gain access to supplemental security income or social security disability insurance has been a great factor for human traffickers to target these individuals. As a matter of fact, we have unique cases in the United States that proves how some traffickers establish fully legal entrepreneur businesses. And the whole purpose was for serving individuals with disabilities. And after some years, when the cases came out, they actually have been targeted individuals with disabilities, not because of the kindness of their heart, that they wanted to serve this population. From the beginning, they established all of these institutions fully legally for the purpose of targeting these individuals and exploiting them. We have some important cases that if you're interested, you can just search online for Basement of Horror. Basement of Horror is a 2018 case in the state of Ohio that human traffickers particularly established entrepreneur housing in order to target individuals with disabilities. Pictures, news stories, everything about those cases is online. But what is very interesting, traffickers were holding individuals in the basement of that institution they were renting. So it is possible for you getting some phone calls about some injuries or some situations to respond. And when that is exactly the same stories I mentioned, when you go to places that only you can go because general public are not allowed to go, you need to look for it. Anything that doesn't sound right to you, anything that could be a red flag, area is just not clean, it's not a residence. Why a minor, why someone with disability need to be held in a basement? Why they are holding in that circumstances? These are something that you can be at watch for and report it to. Also dependency. Individuals with disabilities depends on their disabilities. They depend on another family member or even their care providers to provide for them. And those dependency, unfortunately, has been sometimes in cases a situation and a scenario that trafficker use it as a situation to further exploit them. And in order to provide the basic need that that individual with disability has, they were supposed to provide them sex services or the labor servitude form that they were doing. Depends on their disabilities. Individuals with disabilities may not be able to communicate with the world outside. Even if they had the number, even if they have the information, they may not be able to just ask for help. We had one of the important cases in the history of the United States. So again, flashback to that slide. High profit, low risk. So in that case, traffickers targeted 55 deaf from Mexico, recruited them with legal documentation, brought them to the United States. Of course, that they reported wrong activities in the paper for the Department of Homeland Security, bless you, while they were issuing the visas. That was another fraud they committed on the case. But think about how they engineered the case. They spent time, effort, energy, money to go to a foreign country, recruit 55 individuals who are deaf. They speak another language. They are from another culture. Also, they are deaf that they can't communicate with the people at all, meaning that they don't have to keep them in a cage, physical cage. They just manage the environment in a situation that the victim sounds like being in a cage, isolated fully, so that they are not able to ask, seek help. That is another factor. And also, individuals with disabilities may be desensitized to touches. Oftentimes, many of these disabilities may not be properly educated about sex education, particularly targeting sex trafficking situations. For that reason, they have no clue about what is the consent. Also, it doesn't matter if the consensual matter even applies to their situation. Just having a community with false or some thoughts that because they are individuals with disabilities, they just have no understanding of any of these relationships is a form of situation and discrimination that put these individuals back even to be able to gain information about this situation. So obviously, when traffickers come to them and they want to be their friends, because they are so isolated and oftentimes they don't have that many friends, they're just so excited to become friends. And they do all the effort moving forward as possible to just keep that friend. Even if that friend gonna ask them, request them to provide sexual favors. Even if they ask them, hey, I have a friend. Do you wanna be friend with my friend? So this is what you need to do. And by the way, I am not making this up. These are the real cases we have seen that is happening in our community. We talk about isolation. Individuals with disabilities, based on their disabilities, they have a layer of isolation. Usually in the schools, in the work setting, so many places, people really are not willing to become a friend with someone with disabilities for so many reasons. We put these individuals in an isolation. And that is actually what traffickers are interested. Traffickers are looking for someone who's disconnected from community. Even if they go and share with people what they are going through, no one's gonna believe them. People are gonna think, oh, he, she, just a little bit, they don't know what they are talking about. So for that reason, just let it out. These are the situations that unfortunately we are facing in our communities. Social discrimination that exists is still within our community. As of today, you know that individuals with disabilities have been seen differently in so many settings, and for that reason, they are not receiving the same kind of right and other people that also can put them in a situation. Imagine a scenario that we have an individual with disabilities. They just want to go to do a simple shopping from a simple location, but the location is not just friendly, providing the access to that individual. It is not uncommon for the trafficker just for the purpose of only buying or providing that single item from that special location for them to establish a relationship. and have their trust, and then gonna exploit them. And that exploitation, remember, can't be or shouldn't be always sex trafficking or labor trafficking. It could be that coercing them for the purpose of earning their social money income and disabilities income. So what can you do? Education, awareness, report. So you are among those 5%, as we mentioned now, which is great. Now you have some form of awareness. Please make sure that awareness does not just remain with you. Try to just raise awareness for your family members, other colleagues. As simple as information, just clear some facts for them. Those easy facts, as simple as, did you know human trafficking doesn't involve kidnapping only? All of those usual things that people believe about human trafficking can't be something that you can just open a door for another person. As simple as providing them one of these examples we talked about some of these cases, or some of the information you learned from the article. It could be your colleague, it could be your family member, it could be someone you care for. And then report it, which the reporting is gonna come in the next few slides. By the way, I brought some of these brochures. This is our website here. In our website, top right, there is a link about all courses. So if you click on all courses, right now we have 2 modules about human trafficking, which is free of charge. If you need further information, you can watch that one, or also refer that to someone that you think they need to receive this information about human trafficking. If this is an emergency situation, I think you are 911, right? Okay, so you are 911. So, but for you, I would say that national human trafficking is a good number. Or I can tell you that it used to be a good number before the COVID pandemic, then during the COVID, they are struggling. We have received, unfortunately, lately, information from our community members that they stayed on the line as long as, unfortunately, 48 minutes for someone to just pick up the phone. And this is unacceptable for a hotline of these situations. For that reason, we spoke with our Eastern Missouri Human Trafficking Task Force. So those 2314 number you see, these are the direct number of our Human Trafficking Task Force. We also have a officer, detective attached to St. Charles County Police Department who is in St. Charles County. So if they receive this tip, his name is Jerry. Jerry just come in and then he can help you with that. This is more information for you. So mokate.org is another nonprofit organization in the area that they provide list of resources that can provide housing, counseling, all of those services for victims of human trafficking. You are more than welcome to just visit their website and see the available resources for them.
85 years ago, the United States outlawed child abuse in sweatshop labor, a scourge that Franklin Roosevelt called this ancient atrocity. So it was a shock in 2022 to learn that an American company owned by a Wall Street firm sent children as young as 13 to work in slaughterhouses. The disgrace was more disturbing because the company, PSSI, is vital to national food safety, and its owner, Blackstone, claims to be a model of management. Both companies say they had no idea they employed children in 8 states, but it was obvious to teachers in Grand Island, Nebraska, who noticed acid burns on a child.
The story will continue in a moment.
In our story, you will see only 2 photos of children working in a slaughterhouse. Because of privacy, 2 with obscured faces are all the U.S. Department of Labor would give us. But 2 may be enough. Their hard hats read PSSI for Packers Sanitation Services Incorporated, the nation's leading slaughterhouse cleaning service, with 15,000 workers in 432 plants, taking in more than $1 billion a year. Not, it seemed, a likely abuser of children.
It seemed possible, but not necessarily likely. And if it were possible, maybe it was someone who'd slipped through the cracks.
Shannon Rebolledo is a 17-year Labor Department investigator who was skeptical, but she went to Grand Island, Nebraska last summer after a middle school told police about acid burns on the hand and knee of a 14-year-old girl. The student explained that she worked nights in this slaughterhouse on the edge of town. What did the educators at Walnut Middle School tell you?
It seemed to be known within the community that minors either are or were working overnight shifts. They told us about children that were falling asleep in class, that had burns, chemical burns. They were concerned for the safety of the kids. They were concerned that they weren't able to stay awake and do their job, which is learning in school.
Because they'd been up all night.
Right.
Up all night at the JBS Slaughterhouse, an immense plant that produces 5% of the beef in America. JBS can butcher 6,000 cows a day here, but each night the plant was turned over to PSSI for cleaning from 11 to 7 a.m. Shannon Rebolledo staked out the parking lot as JBS left and PSSI came in.
And you really noted the difference in the appearance of these workers that were coming to work this late night shift.
What do you mean?
They were little. They looked young.
She believed children were washing bloody floors and razor-sharp machines with scalding water and powerful chemicals. So Rebolledo returned with a team and a search warrant. She says they found 9 children at work, a revelation that triggered a national audit of PSSI. And what did you find?
That this was the standard operating procedure, that there were minors employed across the country between the ages of 13 and 17 working the overnight shift.
This was not a mistake.
There's no way that this was just a mistake, a clerical error, a handful of rogue individuals getting through. This was the standard operating procedure.
How many minors did you identify?
We were able to identify and confirm 102 minors at 13 different plants in 8 different states.
Do you believe that 102 is the full extent?
Not at all. I believe that the number is likely much higher.
Last November, the Department of Labor filed suit against PSSI. The company responded with this: PSSI has an absolute company-wide prohibition against hiring minors. It added, "We will defend ourselves vigorously against these claims." The statement said PSSI checks eligibility of employees, including this girl, on a federal database. But that database is well known to be abused in an industry that can struggle to find workers. The jobs are grim and dangerous, and so they are often filled by immigrants who are desperate for work. Some immigrants use false papers to routinely beat the federal identification system that is known as E-Verify. Employers have known for nearly 30 years that E-Verify is useless if the applicant has bought, borrowed, or stolen an actual ID, which is common. And in the case of the children, E-Verify was especially dubious.
These weren't close calls. In some cases, there were 13-year-olds working, and they were identified by PSSI as being in their 30s. It's not possible.
In its statement when the suit was filed, PSSI said in addition to E-Verify, it has industry-leading, best-in-class procedures, including extensive training, document verification, biometrics, and multiple layers of audits.
The system that they use automatically flags whether or not someone is certified that they are 18 or not. And what we found in our review was that it was regularly ignored if someone didn't certify that they were 18.
Did any of the children tell you how long they had been working at the plant?
Yes.
And how long was that?
We looked back at a 3-year period, so we can confirm that they had minors working there as early as 2019.
4 weeks after its vow to vigorously defend itself, PSSI settled with the government. It did not dispute the finding that it hired children. PSSI promised not to do so in the future and agreed to regular audits. The company paid the maximum fine of $1.5 million, which was about 1% of its cash on hand. The settlement ended the suit, but it did not answer the question why. The children's pay was the same as adults, so why hire kids? Jessica Lima gave us insight into this question and into the desperation of the workers.
People, I know we need money to survive, to pay bills, to pay rent, but for me, it's not. We just need a job.
Lima worked for PSSI as an adult in another plant. She told us it was obvious some coworkers were children.
They have the age from, like my kids are right now. They should be in school. They not should be there. For us, like adult, it's hard. You can imagine for our children. It's not easy.
Do you believe that the supervisors at PSSI knew that these were children that they were hiring?
They know, but they don't say nothing because just need the people to get the job done.
People to get the job done. Jessica Lima told us turnover of workers was high in the tough overnight jobs, but there was never a let-up in the pressure to get the slaughterhouses open by dawn. In Grand Island, many are at fault. In county court, 2 parents have been convicted of child abuse or endangerment for sending kids to the plant. A mother was sentenced to 60 days.
There's a lot of blame.
And in this audio recording, a stepfather is being sentenced to 30 days by Judge Arthur Wetzel.
Obviously, the company that employed this young lady has substantial blame. Forcing young children to work on a kill floor at a beef packing plant, taking false identification that the young lady was 22 years of age, when in fact she was 14. There's blame to be passed upon the mother who obtained the false documents so her child could work. Also, the elephant in the room, JBS, is at blame for hiring a cleaning company such as this to conduct their affairs in their plant.
Parents purchased false identities. Children were coached to lie. But it was up to PSSI to ensure its operations didn't create a market for child labor. In its defense, a top PSSI official told us off camera, "We own this. We know we made some mistakes. It's inexcusable." PSSI now says it has fired more than 36 local managers.
The sheer nature, the systemic failures, I've never seen systemic failures like this. The violations across the board at all of these different locations, I've never seen something like that.
For all the years the investigation found child labor, PSSI has been owned by Wall Street's Blackstone, the largest private equity firm in the world. Blackstone told us extensive pre-investment due diligence showed PSSI had industry-leading hiring compliance, but it seems that diligence failed to find what was obvious to investigators watching a shift change in a parking lot. Still, the investment giant says a claim of insufficient diligence or oversight is simply false. And yet, 102 children labored at 13 slaughterhouses in 8 states.